Prénom Tony. Tango Oscar November Yankee. Le 1er avril 62. 1er avril 62, ouais.
Roger. Daniel Alexandre 2 enrôlé pour Info One en contrôle. Section suivante c'est 487 du Tokyo Club.
C'est pas vrai. Oui, elles sont pas bien sûr. C'est le de gauche qui va le
Maybe we should ask him if he's going to give a press conference.
That's not a bad idea, is it?
Well, he's the man to ask, isn't he?
He is. Do you want to?
I might.
Well, I'll film it if you want.
Mr. Davignon, are you thinking of having a press conference?
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
No.
Why not?
Because we don't have enough important things to say.
Well, we doubt that somehow.
How are you?
Netje van Kissinger.
Bonjour, monsieur. De con, en tout cas.
Ja, en dit is de stap en tegen iedere hoofdstuk.
You coming?
Oh, Bill! Hey, Carl Bill! All right. Hey, Sweden!
Papandreou?
Papandreou, Prime Minister of Greece.
Yeah. All right.
No.
Get another one of those.
Sorry?
I don't want to break your filming, but there's a guy over here from the paper I tried to get at. Hold on.
Yeah, it is.
Well, my name is Jim Tucker. I'm a freelance writer from Washington. I've covered Bilderberg for the Spotlight for the last 20 years. I've chased them all over North America and Europe. It's been a lot of fun. They're so secretive, it's always difficult to find out where they are going to meet. This year was even more difficult because they had planned to meet at Tilst, Austria, which is near Innsbruck, at the Interalpen Hotel. But then they got disappointed, became disappointed with the election of George Hyder's Freedom Party to piece of the government. And they decided to be politically correct and boycotted Austria. Now these high-powered people found it difficult to suddenly say on short notice that we want to take over your resort. Not have any other guests there, seal it off with armed guards, deployed police, the military in many cases, sometimes with dogs, and break your contracts, a great liability with everybody else. So they ended up with the Chateau du Lac and probably some of the little villas they're part of the Chateau du Lac. It was very difficult finding out, and if I told you, people would be exactly how I did it. People would be fired. Good people would be injured, and I'd lose sources. But I can tell you that the source was a solid enough Bilderberg participant who does not know he's the source, that we felt quite confident that it was the Chateau du Lac. There was this information, Chateau du Lac, just outside Brussels, a few miles. There was some disinformation going on. They tried to make us believe that the meeting would be in NATO and only a few Bilderberg people would be staying at the Chateau du Lac and others would be scattered around town because of the lack of lodging, and they'd be bussed up to the NATO headquarters where the meeting would really be held. They were so hoping that I would be standing outside NATO headquarters, and all the other newspapermen who eventually showed up and the broadcasters who eventually showed up would be staring at the empty NATO building while they were doing evil business, their usual evil work at the Chateau du Lac. But fortunately, in checking things out further, especially when, well, we felt certain when the armed guards were deployed and they put up that little tent to shield the luminaries from identification as they got out of their cars. That was definitely classic Bilderberg. We knew then they're holed up at the Chateau du Lac. They would not be anywhere else. They're not going to be ferried anywhere. And that's as much as I can tell you without hurting myself and innocent people about how I found out.
What about some of the bum steers that you were given? How did those come through? Because that's one of the things which characterises Bilderberg.
Yes.
Misinformation and disinformation. Whereabouts did they come from?
Example would be the Washington Post.
Start that answer again.
The Washington Post. Since they first met under the name Bilderberg in 1954, the publisher of the Washington Post has attended. First, it was the late Phil Graham. He died. His wife came out of the kitchen and became publisher, Catherine Graham. She attended. She passed the torch to Donald Graham. Now, the Post carried in the middle of March a story about all the people boycotting Austria because of bad old George Hyder. And they mentioned in the middle of the story, one of the few times they've ever used the word Bilderberg, that Bilderberg would be abandoned Austria, rough paraphrase of course, but abandoned Austria in favor of France. Well, I called up the Telfs, that hotel in Telfs, Austria, where they met in 1988. I was there. And they readily told me, yes, Bilderberg had been scheduled to meet at their Interalpen hotel, but they had canceled. The Post never did correct that misstatement of fact, saying it was France. They haven't yet. But Donald Graham, the publisher of the Washington Post, is in the Chateau du Lac right now participating in this Bilderberg meeting, and he has promised to reveal nothing. All of those participants, those representing newspapers, and the Washington Post, New York Times, LA Times, Los Angeles Times, excuse me, the major broadcast networks, television broadcast news anchors in the United States have all, at one time or another, attended these meetings. They all promise absolute secrecy. That's what makes it so much fun. Evil is done in the darkness. Good is done in the sunshine. So Bilderberg wants us to unwash multitudes to appreciate their diligent efforts. Let them open up their meetings, put a press table down there, provide some typewriters, and make themselves available for interviews between sessions, instead of trying to climb under a rock every year and hide.
Now, the current chairman of Bilderberg is Etienne Davignon. When we spoke to him at the conference, he said that there was nothing of interest that they were discussing in this.
He's a liar. pardon my English. Over 20 years, I've infiltrated, many times penetrated Bilderberg meetings, examined their documents, talked to sources within their resorts who've also brought me documents to keep my eyes and ears. And I think it's very interesting when Bilderberg decides, that's when they met at an island off of Spain some years ago, that Lady Thatcher should be thrown out as head of the government in Britain. They were mad, angry, because she was resisting giving up the, excuse me, it's cold out there today. She resisted surrendering that symbol of sovereignty, the pound, in favor of the euro and other surrendering other matters of sovereignty to the European Union. So she's replaced by our own party with a Japanese artist named John Major, our own party. I had the pleasure of talking, not interviewing, but talking briefly with Lady Thatcher at a reception in Washington shortly afterwards, and asked her opinion. And she said she considered, Lady Thatcher said, she considered a tribute to be denounced by Bilderberg. She expressed contempt for any head of state who would surrender any national sovereignty to any regional or world organization.
Now, you just said that...
Now, would that Bilderberg kid have told you, that's dull, you wouldn't be interested in us tying a can to Lady Thatcher's tail? Would that be not interesting? Is that what he says not interesting? Or maybe inventing the Persian Gulf War was kind of dull. Or perhaps the invasion of Yugoslavia, a sovereign country. Maybe that was not interesting. Maybe he doesn't think that was interesting. Bilderberg had a lot of motives for that. Now, obviously, Milosevic is a bad guy. Mean, bad. Should we go to war? How about Rwanda? Sierra Leone, or however you pronounce it. All these bloodbaths in Africa. There's plenty of places we can go to war and kill kids if we say we're do-gooders and we're going to punish bad people. It was important to Bilderberg to establish NATO as the UN's world army. That came in 2 paragraphs in the Washington Post. Not that directly. These 2 paragraphs are separated widely from one page to the next. But according to the Washington Post, the NATO 50-year celebration of Washington a year ago in April. I think it was a year ago. It was April. Chirac of France. I'm trying to remember exactly how the story went. One paragraph quotes one of the luminaries as saying that NATO now has license to go anywhere in the world. Solve any problems. Mentioned various countries around the world. Chirac later says we'd only do so under the auspices of the United Nations. Now, when you put those 2 paragraphs together, NATO is effectively the world standing army of the United Nations. The first time they fired a shot in anger was to invade Yugoslavia, a sovereign country. Did Yugoslavia present a threat to Western Europe? Was Yugoslavia likely to bomb Washington? Under its own charter, NATO for 50 years was a defensive posture to defend Western Europe against a possible attack by the Soviet Union in a big, big, bad war. As soon as the Cold War is over, and the first shots fired in anger was not in defense, but was invading a sovereign country. You can be mad with Milosevic as much as you want. There's a lot of bloody-handed dictators around the world to be mad at. I can get pretty unhappy with President Clinton, the most bloody-handed draft dodger to ever be Commander-in-Chief of the United States Armed Forces.
You made some interesting accusations there, for example, about Mrs. Thatcher. How can you substantiate what you say? Do you have ways of, for example, on a particular one, how can you prove that that was being discussed in the meeting when there's such a sea of security around it?
Well, when I first started out 20 years ago, readers may have to just trust my credibility. I think I've built up a pretty good track record over the years, so they can trust my credibility. Now, Lady Thatcher knew exactly what I was talking about when I mentioned Bilderberg I said it more delicately, but something Bilderberg tying a can to her tail before she was shut down. She knew exactly what I was talking about. She responded very directly.
But how did you find that out beforehand? That's what I'm saying. Before you spoke to her, how did you know that that was the
it's been some years now, but typically I've gotten information several ways. I don't dare tell them all or I'll lose those sources. I've gone through drain pipes over walls. And on one occasion, the ground crew let me be a gardener with them, the landscapers. They gave me a little brown jumpsuit and a cap and a rake to carry around, and I was the groundskeeper. Well, maybe a few leaves had to be picked up around the facility of David Rockefeller. Well, we want to keep the place neat and nice, don't we? Sources within the staff, meeting evenings, we met tonight, providing information. I've got a lot of Bilderberg documents in my hot little fist in my office in Washington. In fact, it goes back to about 1981. I was covering Bilderberg in a resort about 40 miles outside Montreal. No, I got confused. I think it was Long Island. A year or two later. And I penetrated the meeting a number of times, and somehow Senator McMathias, the Republican senator from Maryland, who attended meetings regularly in those years, somehow his portfolio, which contained the agenda, the list, and much more information, a portfolio handed out to each participant, somehow that came into my possession. He was a little bit unhappy about that. And he's ordered that my credentials to cover the Congress, the House, and the Senate be yanked, and they were. But when they yanked them, I said, I'm going to survive without your credentials. I'll have to lose a little business from people who need credentials. But I'm not through making Senator Mathias mad at me yet. I've got a lot more senators to make mad. I've got my own office. I don't need the big public subsidy that those credentials carry. In Washington, you got those credentials. That means you've got a